Neighbors from hell, what happened to you? When I was a kid, our neighbor built this giant deck on his house that actually went over our fence. We ended up having to go to the city to force him to make it smaller. We went to a family reunion shortly after, and when we came back, he had a sign on his fence facing our front door that said, "Peekaboo, I see you Sperados," and he had set up a bunch of security cameras on his house that were all aimed at our house. We pretty much just avoided him from then on until my parents divorced and sold that house.
That's an interesting situation. Sounds like your neighbor had some issues with boundaries. I get why you'd want to avoid him after that. It's funny how things can get so weird between neighbors. Life just moved on after your parents sold the house, I guess. I wonder if he still has those cameras up.
I had a neighbor who would bring women back every weekend. Usually it was cool. I'd hear the bed squeak for 20 seconds, stop, silence, then laughing. I'm not the jealous type in any way, but when he constantly played shitty German house music at 4 in the morning, I started getting pissed. After talking to him about it, he essentially told me to fuck off. So the next time it happened, I YouTubed babies crying and put it on full blast through my speaker, which I had sat up against the wall. Needless to say, it stopped after that. Edit. Great. My highest comment is about how I cock-blocked my neighbor, so I didn't have to listen to his shitty techno music at 4 in the morning.
That's a solid move, honestly. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. It's funny how people think their late-night activities don't affect others. The crying baby trick is creative. It's like a counterattack to the annoying music. Bet your neighbor didn't see that coming. It's a classic case of not respecting boundaries, and you handled it in a way that got the message across.
My husband's ex-wife. It had been 6 years since their divorce, and out of the blue, she called him up at his work. Just to chat, catch up, whatever. Fine, he isn't going to be a dick or anything, but he definitely doesn't want to talk to his ex. Then, she started showing up at the store repeatedly, talked to everyone in his store, shared her story about the two of them to all his employees, claimed she was just showing up at the store to hang out with her new friends, asked his assistant manager out on a date, moved into the same apartment complex as us, started showing up at our door, left little notes and letters on his car or on our door. We moved as soon as our lease was up.
That sounds like a pretty weird situation. I can't imagine having an ex invade your space like that. It's one thing to move on, but actively trying to insert themselves back into your life is a lot. It's good your husband took it seriously, and you both decided to move. Sometimes, cutting ties completely is the best way to handle things like that. Better to start fresh somewhere new.
A few years back, our neighbors were getting kicked out because their mortgage was 8 months behind. How they even got a bank to loan them the money in the first place is still beyond me. The week before they left, they ripped out everything to sell. Bathroom fixtures, oven doors, paving stones. If it could be removed, it was. When they finally moved out, the only things they left behind were the dog, the cat, and the kid.
That's a wild situation. It's surprising how some people handle tough times. Just taking everything they could, leaving behind pets and a child is a serious move. Makes you think about what really matters, In a way, it's kind of a reflection of priorities and chaos. Hope the dog, cat, and kid found a better place after that.
In this apartment my uncles lived in was connected to the neighbors by the bathroom, so they shared the bathroom. The neighbor lady was crazy, and some mornings they would wake up and she would be in their apartment doing some creepy, weird crap. One morning they recall they woke up and she was standing over them, over their bed, watching them sleep. That was the breaking point. They got the hell out.
That's pretty wild. Imagine waking up to find someone just standing there watching you. I mean, that's a solid reason to move out. You can't really feel comfortable in your own space with a neighbor like that. I guess sometimes you're just stuck with weird situations, but that one definitely crossed the line. You'd really want your privacy in your own place, not to be part of some horror story.
Back when I was a little kid, my next-door neighbors did hard drugs and were always loud and had women over. One day, they got raided by the SWAT, and as it turns out, the squad leader was my hockey teammate's dad. He chuckled when he saw me through the window and chatted with my dad for a few. It was pretty cool to watch and see their guns and suits. 10 out of 10 will remember for the rest of my life.
That's an interesting memory. I can imagine how surreal it must have been. Seeing a familiar face in such a chaotic situation would stick with anyone. It's wild to think about how people live their lives next door, and then something so intense happens. Moments like that definitely shape your view of the world as a kid. Just goes to show, you never know what's going on with your neighbors.
I have super religious neighbors. They hang signs for the local church camp on their property, ECT. They kept putting our garbage cans in our driveway. While it was stupid and annoying, it became more and more aggressive. They would trespass on my property and do damage to my house. But I could never catch them in the act. So I did the only thing a sane person would do. I put on my velvet ritual cloak and made a show of putting a salt circle around my property, chanting and carrying on. Never bother me again.
That's an interesting way to handle it. Sounds like it escalated to a point where you had enough. The whole salt circle thing is definitely a creative approach. It's funny how people can get so territorial. At least it worked out in your favor. I guess sometimes you have to match energy with energy, whether it's serious or a bit out there.
We have a beautiful pit bull/boxer mix that was stolen out of our backyard by our neighbors and given to a shelter for pit bulls. We looked for our dog for weeks, all day and night. Just as we were about to give up, my mom checked local adoption ads and found her dog. The shelter she was given to was literally a block away from our house, and they informed us of the people who brought her there, who turned out to be our neighbors. So we got our dog back, and the neighbors continued to try to get our dog taken away from us by calling the police for animal abuse multiple times, even when we were playing with her in our own backyard and very obviously loved her.
That's a wild story. It's rough when you trust neighbors and they pull something like that. It must have been such a relief to find your dog nearby after searching for so long. Good on your mom for checking the adoption ads. It's frustrating that the neighbors kept trying to get your dog taken away. Some people just can't mind their own business. Glad you got your dog back, though.
My first apartment was a real dump in a seedy complex, and I had two people who I'd consider neighbors from hell. The first was the lady who lived above me, who let her small dog piss and shit all over the balcony, meaning we basically couldn't open our back door in the summer because of the stench. She also smoked weed constantly and asked to borrow money several times. When they moved out, they had to tear up all the carpet and deep clean the whole place. She had no teeth, too, which was weird. Another was a guy who lived a few spots down from us. One night, I could hear him fighting with his girlfriend through my window. So naturally, my girlfriend and I were content eavesdropping on it until we heard a loud smack. Immediately, I called the police, and off he went to jail. When he returned for his stuff, it's my understanding that he got a grade A ass-whooping from several of her friends who were there to welcome him home.
Sounds like a rough first place. Those neighbors really took the term, bad apples, to a new level. I can't imagine dealing with that kind of chaos on a daily basis. The lady with the dog and her habits must have been unbearable, and that fight next door? Pretty intense. At least you did the right thing calling the cops. It's wild how quickly things can escalate in those kinds of situations. Definitely an interesting start to adult life.
Pet hoarder next door. Unkept yard. Monstrous amount of feces kept in a garden shed on the edge of their property, amazingly right beside our deck. We always wondered what was going on over there. Then a flyer shows up in our mailbox. Lost male iguana. Aggressive and will bite. Do not approach. Please use AITA number. The fuck.com a few days later, animal control arrives with trucks and vans. They get into this house and pull out hundreds of animals. Exotic birds, lizards, cats, dogs, it was insane. All were sick or injured. She had specific rooms for them, like a blind animal room or pregnant animal room. No word on that aggressive male iguana. Might still be creeping around that neighborhood. Aggressively biting children, perhaps.
That whole situation was wild. It was like a scene from a movie. You hear a lost iguana flyer, and suddenly animal control is pulling out a zoo from next door. Just the thought of all those sick animals packed in there really hits hard. And that iguana? Yeah, that's unsettling. I hope it doesn't trouble anyone. Living next to that must have been stressful. Makes you appreciate a simple, clean yard.
We had a noisy neighbor for a while. The guy liked having parties. Once or twice a week we could handle, but he started having them more often. Then one week he decided to have loud parties every night, which wouldn't have been much of an issue. But he liked having them in his bedroom and kept his music blasting and his friends making a racket until 6/7 a.m. I couldn't sleep through his crap, and for a week straight, I had no real sleep apart from that hour lull between 7 and 8 a.m. I was getting in trouble at work for being exhausted when it wasn't my fault. After a few days of this and getting nowhere with him, we wrote a letter and posted it through his door just before the time his mom gets home. Turns out it all went quiet at 7 because that's the time she got home. She found a note on the floor and read it. I was happy to be woken up by her screaming at him. If he had been smart and kept his parties downstairs, everything would have been fine, and we even stated it in the letter we sent them. Parties didn't happen very often after that, and he moved out a few years ago.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with a neighbor. He liked to throw parties too. At first, it was manageable, but then it spiraled. I got tired of the noise and lack of sleep. After trying to talk to him failed, we decided to leave a note. It got pretty loud when his mom found it. Things quieted down after that. Funny how a note can change everything.
They called the police on me because I was watching television muted with closed captioning with the windows closed and the blinds shut in my own home at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. When we had moved in, my roommate brought the neighbor a plate of cookies and all of our phone numbers and names, and said to always feel free to call us any time of day and we'd do what she needed. Our neighbor said, "No, we'll call the police instead." And boy, did she ever. We actually started throwing parties because the cops were going to come anyways.
That's a wild story. It's funny how people can overreact. You'd think living next to someone friendly would mean a chill vibe. Instead, it turned into this whole thing. I guess if they want to call the cops, why not make it a party, right? Sounds like you and your roommate took it in stride, just turned it into a situation you could control.
This very OCD lady who came out every morning to pick up the fallen leaves and cleaned her garden. It was her compulsion in a sense. Anyways, she ended up calling child services on another neighbor and her son. They ended up just dumping all leaves and garden waste on her garden and started a war between them. TLDR, a garden neat freak of a neighbor called child services on another.
It's pretty funny how people get caught up in their routines. This lady was so obsessed with her garden that it backfired on her. Instead of just enjoying her space, she let her need for order escalate into a feud. The other neighbor must have found it hilarious to dump all that waste in her yard. It's wild how a little leaf cleanup can spark chaos between neighbors. Just goes to show how intense some folks can be about their gardens.
Drinking beer out on the front porch during a Saturday evening. Called the police. We were all of age, so the police said to keep it down. This happened multiple times. The cops stopped asking for IDs. Their dog would be left off leash in the front yard. When completing our runs, the dog would charge around the corner and bite one of us. They said we should know better. Complain when people would park near their house. Threatened to tow multiple cars.
Sounds like a typical neighborhood vibe. Just hanging out, trying to enjoy a drink, but the cops kept showing up. It's weird how one little thing can escalate, like a loose dog causing trouble. And the parking situation is just classic. People can be so uptight about their space, even when everyone is just trying to have a good time. Guess that's how it goes sometimes.
My neighbor in my apartment complex always tries to stop and talk to me, usually when I'm running late for work, which isn't awful. The awful thing is I'm pretty sure he looks out the window and waits. He always manages to open the door and come outside as I happen to be walking by, and goes in promptly after I tell him I'm running late for work. Same neighbor came outside at 11:40 night as I was putting a new window decal on my car, practically climbed in and insisted on helping me, then proceeded to try to talk to me afterwards. Another time, I was backing out of my parking spot, and he was pulling out of his in my blind spot. He honked his horn, so obviously I stopped before I hit him. Instead of him pulling forward and leaving like a normal person, he put his car in park and came over and knocked on my driver's side window and asked me if I even looked back before I started backing out. It was really aggressive. He's also jokingly said to me that he's seen me bring a lot of men into my apartment. I really don't like that guy. He's very creepy.
That sounds pretty uncomfortable. It's strange when someone just doesn't get the hint. It must be annoying to feel like you're being watched or that they're always around when you don't want to interact. I've had a few weird neighbor encounters too, but nothing that intense. It's tough when someone crosses the line from friendly to intrusive. Best to keep your distance from that guy and avoid unnecessary conversations.
I win. I live in a very old house with a very old garage. In fact, the garage was built as one structure with a dividing wall, and the adjoining section of the garage belongs to the neighbors. Think, one structure, two garages, two properties. One day, new neighbors move in. Before we get the chance to say hi, we get a letter in the mail from the attorney of our new neighbors. The letter explains that the neighbors will be assuming ownership of our half of the garage. They will be kind enough to pay for maintenance, and we can use it to the extent that they are not. We have our lawyer write them a letter kindly asking them to fuck off into the sunset. That's that, or so we thought. One day, Sport next door decides he's going to paint a portion of our half of the garage. We went out the next day and painted back over. The neighbors eventually defaulted on their mortgage and had to move out. Kind of surreal experience.
That sounds like a real trip. Living in a shared garage situation can get tense fast, especially with new neighbors jumping and claiming your space. Sending that lawyer letter must have felt good. It's funny how they thought they could just take over, then ended up leaving. Just goes to show, sometimes people can't handle the old charm of a place. Glad you didn't let it slide.
We lived in Baltimore City for a long time. My parents finally had enough money to buy a house out in the suburbs where they believe everything will be much safer and more stable. Cut to 3 months later, the entire block sitting out on their front porches as the DEA is busting the house 2 doors down from us. All the other families were freaking out, never having dealt with something even remotely similar to this. My mother and father kicked back with a bottle of wine to watch like it was Masterpiece Theater. They joked it was nice to see some of Baltimore City bleed out into the county. Edit. Grammar.
That's something. Moving to the suburbs for safety usually feels like a fresh start. It's funny how life throws surprises, though. While the neighbors were all tense and worried, your parents just took it easy. It's like they didn't even let the chaos affect them. Seems like they had a solid perspective on things. Sometimes you just gotta sit back and enjoy the show, no matter where it happens.
There's a section of sidewalk that connects the sidewalk that runs parallel to the road, to the actual road, if that makes sense. This is right by my property line, which means that the 50-foot strip of grass between the sidewalk and road has like 49 feet 10 inches on my neighbor's property and 2 inches on mine. So naturally, the neighbor never mows that last 2-inch, even though if they haven't mowed, I'll do the whole 50.
Sounds like a classic neighbor issue. That tiny strip of grass can really test some people. You try to keep things neat, and they just ignore it. It's funny to think about how much effort goes into that last 2 inches. I guess some people just don't care. It's a small thing, but it can be annoying if you're the one who likes a tidy yard.
We had a neighbor like that in a prior house. He had a giant lab that took shits that had to be 3 pounds each time. The dog would always come into our yard. I'd spoken to him and his wife about it several times. It had stopped for about 1 week and restart. I started scooping it up and keeping it in a bucket as far from my house as I could and right next to the shared fence. It stunk like hell. After it was full, I dumped it in their driveway. The guy asked me about it, and I told him it would stop once his dog stopped. Never happened again.
That's a wild story. Dealing with a neighbor's dog can be frustrating, especially when they don't take responsibility. It's funny how you found a creative way to send a message. I guess sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. It's good that it worked out in the end, though. Neighbors can be tricky, but standing up for your space is important.
That's really so sad. We are cleaning out my husband's aunt's house now. She too had hoarding tendencies and health issues which prevented her from house maintenance. Although it is very apparent that she didn't do more than sweep the floor in her best health. We offered to help her so many times, and she always passed. We got a giant dumpster and filled it last weekend. We aren't finished yet. It's just sad.
It's tough going through someone's stuff like that. Sometimes you wish they'd let you help when they were around. Cleaning out a place like that brings back memories, both good and bad. It's a heavy task, and you can feel the weight of it all. Just takes time to process everything. It's nice you're there for her in this way, even if she couldn't see it before.
My favorite badass mother story comes from my friend. When he was a baby and his mom was still breastfeeding, she was out shopping when she realized she needed to get home and feed him. As she was going back to her car, some jerk-off blocked her in. She asked him politely to move his car, and her flipped her off. She had a bit to go, and he called her a silly cow and tried to walk away. So she punched him so hard in the face that he was knocked unconscious, took his keys, moved his car, and then gave his keys and her details to the security guard to pass back to the guy when he woke up if he wanted to press charges, got in her car and drove home. Never heard from that guy. Funnily,
that's a pretty memorable story. Your friend's mom definitely took matters into her own hands. It's wild how someone can be so rude, but she didn't just let it slide. Punching him and moving his car? That's next level. Shows a different side of motherhood, too. I guess being a mom can bring out some unexpected strength when it comes to protecting your kid. Just goes to show you never really know what someone's capable of.
Weird, I had a friend with a reverse situation. We were young, like 10-ish, and I would go to his house and play outside with him. There was this 15-year-old kid who would yell at us, and once even shot my friend's 8-year-old neighbor girl with a gas-powered airsoft gun. He didn't really have friends, which probably had something to do with it. He would play football by himself, throwing the ball, then running to catch it. His mom was crazy too. She would ride out on a bike and yell at us, saying that we bullied her son, then would lie to everyone's parents about stuff we didn't do. She had one redeeming factor though. On Halloween, instead of candy, she had a food cart where she made hot dogs and nachos for free. It was really cool.
That's an interesting experience. Kids can be tough, especially when there's no adult supervision. The neighbor girl getting hit must have been wild. Your friend's situation sounds rough with the mom involved too. It's funny how Halloween shifted from candy to free food. That must have been a nice change, at least for a night. It's a different kind of treat, but maybe a better memory overall.
A friend of mine in high school had a coke dealer dad. Friend hated it, and reasonably so. They'd get people banging on the doors and windows in the middle of the night, and one guy just walked into the house in the middle of the night because someone forgot to lock the door. Woke Dad up in the middle of the night and refused to leave until he got his stuff. Dad still does this. Friend has moved out.
That's a tough situation for your friend. Living with that kind of chaos can't be easy. I can't imagine the stress of having strangers show up at all hours. It's good your friend got out when they could. I mean, who wants that kind of drama in their life? Seems like a smart move for their peace of mind. Hopefully, they found a better path away from all that.
I find that college kids still in that frame of mind are easily frightened by adults speaking to them like they're children and police. The neighbor above me was doing God knows what, but it sounded like they were playing billiards on the kitchen floor. When it went on for too many days, I went up there at 10:45, told them they needed to stop, that this was unacceptable. Quiet hours started at 10 p.m., and at 11 p.m., the city noise ordinances would go into effect, and I would call the police. The guy looked terrified of me, and they haven't been excessively noisy since.
Some people just don't get it. I had a similar issue with my upstairs neighbor. They threw wild parties every weekend. After a few nights of no sleep, I went up and laid down the law. Honestly, I didn't mean to sound harsh, but I think they were scared. It worked though. The noise stopped, and it stayed quiet after that. Sometimes you just have to set boundaries.
This wasn't in PA, was it? It sounds exactly like one of my buddy's renters. He could barely afford the place, rented it to college kids, then it got condemned at the end of the year with $20,000 in repairs needed, plus they skipped out on the last 2 months' rent. He sued, and 6 parents showed up in court mortified when they saw the pictures. I think he ended up collecting about $4,000 from one family, but the others stiffed him. I think one wasn't on the lease and got off. One was dirt poor. The other was across the country and just wouldn't pay. Not sure if he ever sicked a collection agent or anything like that on them, but he had to sell before the case. No rent, no mortgage payment.
That sounds rough. I had a friend in a similar spot. He rented to some guys who partied way too hard and trashed the place. By the time the lease was up, it looked like a disaster zone. He tried to get his security deposit back, but they just vanished. Ended up losing a lot of money. Sometimes, renting to college kids is a gamble that just doesn't pay off.
In PA, where I once lived, we had a very good assembly person. He fought to get my diabetic brother health coverage before Obamacare and without my parents being on assistance. Dad was self-employed with 2 kids in college and 3 in school. Brother is youngest, and parents could not afford the insurance.
That sounds like a pretty tough situation. I can't imagine how stressful it must have been for your family. It's good to hear that there was someone in office willing to help out, especially when healthcare is such a big deal. Having a support system in place can make a huge difference in times like that. It's nice to see community members stepping up for each other.
That reminds me of a story my mom always tells about her cat named Frankie. She had it for 14 years, and it always went to a park across the street. Eventually, one of the neighbor kids knocked on her door, and she opened it to holding the cat up by its neck. He said, "I think your cat died." To this day, she knows he killed the cat. Even after she moved out, she still drives back and tries to get the kid to admit it. He's now 30 and living with his parents, still won't admit it.
That's a pretty wild story. It's crazy how things like that stick with people. Your mom must have been really attached to Frankie. The whole situation with the kid sounds intense, though. I guess some things never really get resolved. It's interesting how memories of pets can stay with us and shape our feelings about loss. I wonder if the kid ever thinks about it.
Jesus Christ. The rest of the stories in this feed have been mildly entertaining from a distance, but this has made me feel physically sick. As the auntie to a 3-year-old girl, my heart is in my throat. Honestly, all I can do is say, well done for getting involved, as unfortunately, so many people wouldn't bother XXX.
It's tough when things get heavy like that. You just don't expect to see stories that hit so close to home. Being an aunt means you feel deeply for those little ones. It's a reminder that some folks do care and step up, even when others turn a blind eye. That involvement can make a real difference, even if it feels tough to digest sometimes.
Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. To be fair, it's just a house, so they were probably just living as normal people would. Converted houses don't have the nice noise-dampening structures that most apartments would have between floors.
That sounds familiar. My friends used to do the same in our shared house before school. It was always chaotic in the mornings, with everyone rushing around, trying to find their stuff. Sometimes it felt like a small circus. I guess living in a house meant you had to get used to the noise and the madness. It was annoying, but also kind of funny in retrospect. We managed somehow.
Same with condo boards. I've lived in my condo for 12 years. The last 3 have been highly unpleasant because of 2 couples that moved in, befriended each other, and then took over the board. I barely leave my unit anymore, but I'm certain they'll find something to complain about. I'm in a wheelchair, so that makes me even more of a target for them.
That sounds rough. Dealing with a condo board can be stressful, especially when a few people take control. I once had a friend who had similar issues with their building. They felt like they were always being monitored. It can be isolating, especially when you can't just step out easily. Hopefully, things improve for you soon, even if it feels like they're looking for reasons to complain. Just hang in there.
When replacing light fixtures in an apartment building, once I saw a shitty notice stating whoever was leaving recycling out was an atrocious human, and they'll be kicked out when they're found, and they installed cameras to watch. It was actually really rude. I took this as a challenge and looked inside all the nooks a camera could be hiding, including the smoke detectors and fixtures, then added a note to the notice saying tradesmen here can confirm there are no cameras, LOL.
That notice sounds pretty harsh. I get why you'd want to push back against that kind of treatment. It was clever to check for cameras and leave that note. It shows that sometimes people just overreact without thinking. It must have felt good to stand up against those over-the-top threats. Who knows, maybe it'll make them rethink their approach next time.
The power was shit, so they frequently had surges that killed lots of electronic devices. Logical thing to do, throw them out the window. Am I being incredibly dense? Or can't these devices be fixed by replacing a few fuses? I mean, if it's an old fridge and the motor's fried, then maybe it's not worth it. But a TV should be fixable, no? Or are we talking lightning-style surges that actually set the appliances on fire?
Seems like a wild way to deal with broken electronics. I guess some people feel it's easier to just toss things out instead of dealing with repairs. A TV can often be fixed, but if the surge is strong enough, it can cause serious damage. You'd probably want to think it through before making that decision. Just depends on the situation and the value of the device.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.